Today, we finished studying infectious diseases and we talk about diarrhea at length and we watch a critical video. So, we got down to, we talked about the plague yesterday and how that's still around, albeit we do have some treatment for that. And then today, let's talk about tuberculosis. This is on 467. Now, according to the last Discovery video I watched on tuberculosis has killed more people than any other disease in like the history of mankind. So your book doesn't say that, but I remember that on a Discovery video. If somebody finds anything different, you can let me know. Tuberculosis is a bad dude. And we don't hear much about it anymore because not a vaccine, but let's read through this. Tuberculosis is a bacterial infection, so we have antibiotics that typically attacks the lungs, spread by breathing in the bacteria from body fluids of an infected person. So it's highly contagious. Now, we have an issue with tuberculosis now. Okay, so, back in the 30s, my great-grandmother got tuberculosis and died. And my grandmother used to tell me these stories. She would like, so it was her mom, so they put her off in one room, kind of away from everybody in the house as best they could. And I guess the dad would go in and bring her stuff and help take care of her. But she was isolated in their home. And a doctor would come by once a week, and like she had a spit cup. So I still think they probably didn't know much about tuberculosis at the time. And so she had a spit cup that she would hack and cough blood up into and stuff and whatever else comes out of that bacterial infection and destroying that lung tissue. And they would collect it and they would check on her. And I think she lived a year or two with it. And so, but the 30s, that was back before antibiotics. So, penicillin, I want to say late 30s, early 40s, maybe that came into production. Anyway, so they didn't have any treatment at that time and most people died from it. Now, so we have treatment. It's not a big deal especially in developed countries. It's becoming a bigger deal in developed countries now because of tuberculosis, the thing we're talking about. Antibiotic resistance, good. So there are quite a few antibiotic resistant strains that we're worried about because if you don't have antibiotics to treat a bacterial infection, put up your phone, Luke, then you definitely can die again. So I saw a video where there's a lady on a flight from Hawaii or maybe from somewhere to or from Hawaii, and she was on a flight, got sick with an antibiotic-resistant variety of tuberculosis. She wound up dying. They went back and checked everybody on the plane. You know how they talked about COVID on plane and worried about transmitting it? And so I think it was something like 18 people on the plane had it. Now, they didn't get as sick. I don't think any of them died. They were treated, but she died. So it was definitely passed around to a lot of people on the flight because the air essentially is recirculating the whole time. So anyway, something to watch out in the future. I could see that, becoming a bigger problem as the more people we have, the more diseases get passed around, the more they evolve and develop resistance and are going to cause more issues. The next one, malaria. What number are we on? 64, malaria. So this is on page 467 at the top. They also talk about the Black Death on here. They have a fun little picture of everybody dying in Europe, looks like, and some angels looking down like, what's going on down there? I don't want to be a part of that. Malaria is a parasitic disease caused by bites from infected mosquitoes. It is most often found in Sub-Saharan Africa. So a few things to tackle. And so malaria is one you hear a lot about. I know, Luke, you can attest to this in AP Bio. We talked about it quite a bit because of the evolutionary aspect and how mutations have caused changes in how people respond to malaria. And, well, for one, what actually causes malaria? Not mosquitoes. What's the parasite? It's a type of
Plasmodium.
a what? Plasmodium. So Plasmodium is basically an animal-like protus, small little microscopic animal-like things, but not enough to be considered an animal. And so that's spread by the mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes take up blood from one thing and carry it to another thing, it's spread. Now,
Dude, mosquitoes not get infected by this bacteria. They're like a
I don't think, I mean, it's in their saliva and stuff, but I don't know that it negatively impacts them. That's a good question.
What if we can genetically modify a parasite to kill a mosquito?
I feel like the
That's not
build up an immunity to it.
a bad idea in sounding, but I don't know how you'd go about doing that.
What do mosquitoes
Or what else might it kill? What other kind of insects?
Well, do they try?
I feel like we have, so in the works though, Layla, there is a lot of testing. Maybe, did we talk about this early in the year where they were doing like genetic modifications to mosquitoes to make them like sterile? They released a bunch of sterile mosquitoes so they don't have as many babies. Did we talk about that?
Yeah.
So they're doing this in some places where they're actively like genetically modifying them, releasing these mosquitoes so that basically they're mating with females and so that they won't produce fertile offspring and to reduce the mosquito populations, ergo getting rid of a lot of mosquito-borne diseases. So as we know, when you alter things in nature, sometimes very bad things can happen. So that's the worry, like what bad might happen. It sounds good getting rid of mosquitoes. I don't think anybody cares about mosquitoes. I don't feel like.
Mosquitoes do anything
But like,
to
what
them?
if other stuff that they eat starts just expanding the population?
I mean, I'm sure they do keep populations down, but I guess other predators would sort them out. Like if you like caribou that get killed by mosquitoes because they suck so much blood of them. I mean, like I guess wolves would probably fill in the gap, or anything that dies from mosquito-borne disease. I guess if you had more of it, eventually something else would starvation or something else would level it out.
What if mosquitoes are from aliens and are never actually on this earth, and they're killing off a bunch of things, and if we take away mosquitoes, then the populations of the original beautiful Mother Earth will come back and you have.
I would be super pissed if I was an alien and I was a mosquito, because I would get squashed by a lot of things. That's not how I would.
No, the mosquitoes aren't the aliens. The aliens genetically modified the mosquitoes. And
Oh.
No wonder why they take our
And it killed off a bunch of animals. So if we take away the mosquitoes, which are the invasive species on Earth, then beautiful Mother Earth will come back to where it used to be.
Whatever you got to tell yourself. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. Although I can't really see a good function for mosquitoes either. Okay, malaria. So what is Sub-Saharan Africa, Jordan?
Beneath the Sahara.
Sahara. So why does this happen mostly in Sub-Saharan Africa? Now, let me clarify. You can get malaria in Central and South America and Southeast Asia and lots of tropical areas throughout the world. We primarily talk about Sub-Saharan Africa because,
That's where it's mostly found.
well, I don't know if it's mostly or if that's just where most of the people die. So I think it used to be about 1 million people died each year from malaria. And now I want to say it's closer to about 500,000. So the number's down because of there's a lot of efforts with mosquito nets and they've used DDT for a long time. And you still have a lot of people dying in Sub-Saharan Africa. One, because you don't have good medicine there. You have a lot of people get sick, get malaria, and there's not very good treatment, okay? Because a lot of the poor countries. So, but when we say Sub-Saharan Africa, we're talking about below the Sahara. Now, the Sahara Desert and the northern part of Africa, like Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Liberia, Egypt, who are most of the people that are from those areas? They're of what, like ethnicity? Arabic. So we don't see a lot of mosquitoes in that area for what reason? They don't eat pork, doesn't qualify. No, that's not the mosquito reason. What?
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with that.
It's in the Sahara, so it's hot and dry, and there's not good places for mosquitoes to breed. Now, Sub-Saharan Africa, this is where most of our malaria and mosquito problems are. What people come from Sub-Saharan Africa? Typically like black people, right? I don't like to say African because that could be people from North Africa, or it could be people from South African descent, but from like European colonialists. So what I'm getting at here is, so typically we think of black people coming from Sub-Saharan Africa. What advantage do they have against, Luke, don't say anything. What advantage do they have against malaria?
Sickle cell.
Okay, sickle cell. So we study this at length in bio, but sickle cell is, how does that help you against malaria?
It doesn't let the parasites penetrate your blood cells.
Yeah, so the sickle-shaped cells are not very good for the Plasmodium developing in. And so you can still get it, but it's not going to develop as well in your cells. And you're not going to see the same side effects. Now, as you know, a lot of people who are of African descent, like Sub-Saharan African descent, have sickle cell. I think it's 1 in 10. I want to say it's roughly 1 in 10 black people are carriers, and I don't know what the number is for actual disease, which means you get it from both parents. But this is one of those things where it's good to be a carrier or to have it from one parent. So it gives you some resistance, but you don't have all the problems associated with sickle cell disease. Y'all probably know somebody with sickle cell disease. Let's not mention any names though. So that is one advantage, evolutionary advantage that people from Sub-Saharan Africa have. Now, I will say this. People who are have a Hispanic background, some people from like southern India and Southeast Asia, there are people from those areas that do have sickle cell. It's just at a much like lower rate. So it's one of those things in the population that spreads. It's just not spread as much because they weren't exposed to it as much over time. What?
You think I have sickle cell?
Probably not. I mean, there's a higher prevalence in that area, but it's not as much. You guys probably even heard of people dying of sickle cell, like down in the Panama Canal. Did y'all study that? Like in the building of the Panama Canal, there's a bunch of people died from that. Did y'all study that history? And there was a dude who came up with, he's like, make sure there's not any standing water, put this in the water to kill the mosquitoes. Didn't y'all study that in history?
I have not studied that.
I don't know. Everybody in last period knew this, so I was thinking y'all would know.
I vaguely remember that.
Maybe they were older. Maybe that's something you get, I don't know, before next year. What?
We did an ape push.
Okay. Andrew chimes in for the one time of the year. Thanks, Andrew. Good job. You brought in your A-push knowledge. I'm glad you got something for us. That's okay. That's the most important. Don't die of malaria. So, malaria is bad, kills a lot of people. Hopefully one day we'll kill all the mosquitoes. I don't know, maybe. We have a problem with mosquitoes here. Now, we don't have a malaria issue, but we have a problem with, skip on to the next one, West Nile virus. It's transmitted to humans via bites from infected mosquitoes. And somebody asked me a good question last period. They said, how does West Nile kill you? And I thought, you know what? I have no idea. So we might have to look that one up during the video today. But you see a lot of mosquito trucks around here that spray. Occasionally you hear about outbreaks of West Nile in people in different parts in the southeast. This is something that I did not ever hear about growing up. So this is something like we talked about, these tropical diseases spreading north and south. It seems like I hear more horses get killed by West Nile than people get killed. I don't know if they're more susceptible.
Never heard of that.
You never heard of West Nile?
No.
I'm going to look it up. I'm going to find some data on that. But it's becoming more and more prevalent. Now, let's see the next one. Severe acute respiratory syndrome is a form of pneumonia. We would call this SARS. Now,
SARS-CoV.
say it.
SARS-CoV-19.
SARS-CoV-19. So this is kind of SARS 1.0, okay? And COVID-19 is basically SARS-2. So they're very similar coronaviruses, very, very similar. This SARS outbreak happened in, I want to say it was in China in the early 2000s, killed around 800 to 1,000 people. And I can't remember where it was transmitted from. I feel like it was from a farm somewhere, and a lot of people got this and they got sick, and a lot of people died, but they were able to isolate it. I also think the transmission rate wasn't as high as we see with like COVID-19. So, and typically also you see when there's a higher death rate, the transmission rate is usually lower. Because if you're getting something and you're dying real quick, what are you not doing?
You're not spreading it.
Yeah, you're not spreading as much. I mean, we got people walking around with COVID and they're spreading it to other people, and so it's easier to spread it. So the bad thing about COVID-19 is you can be in that incubation period for a couple weeks. You can possibly be spreading it. Some of it can be asymptomatic. If you have a disease that's like killing everybody pretty quick, then they're not going to spread it as much. The same thing kind of holds true with Ebola. Y'all hear about this in Africa? You bleed out of like every orifice and 90% of people die. So that one I think is also spread by bats from what I remember. But because it kills people so quickly, you typically don't, you have an outbreak in like a small village or somewhere, but you don't typically have like, a huge countrywide dying of people from it. Now, if one day Ebola becomes airborne, then we've all got problems because that would be an issue. But typically, the more people it kills, the less it's going to spread.
I've had pneumonia before.
I bet you have. Yeah, so SARS, it says it's a form of pneumonia. It's actually a virus that causes pneumonia. I don't like the way they're wording this in the Apes curricula here. It's similar to, so it's also a virus. Pneumonia is usually bacterial in nature where you get fluid in the lungs. Causes that fluid buildup. Similar, I mean, what's killing most people with COVID? Fluid in the lungs, right? Pneumonia. So, transferred by inhaling or touching infected fluids. Now, its sister or cousin or whatever you want to call it, MERS, whatever. Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome is very similar in nature to SARS, a viral respiratory illness transferred from animals to humans. Somewhere, I don't know as much about this one, showed up somewhere in the Middle East. But these are all very similar viruses in nature and the way they look. They're all called coronaviruses because they look like a crown, like queen crown on your head. Yes, they have these spikes all around them, so that kind of gives them their nature. Now, I did hear yesterday they were talking about some modifications in the COVID variants that is making them more, y'all probably heard this, where it makes them more transmissible. Some are more transmissible than others, and that's due to modification in those proteins on the outside. So that is the worry. I think in the future you're going to continue to see variants show up, and it'll be like the flu where you get different booster shots each year or as quickly as they can get them out when they come along, and you just try to keep down the numbers of people that are getting sick. I still think probably in the next year, even when things are pseudo-normal, you'll probably still see people wearing masks who are immunocompromised or have somebody immunocompromised in their home. Yeah.
Do you think that like over time, if a person were to get like the different variants of COVID and live, that they could build up like immunity against future variants?
I think that depends on how different it is. So I will say this. So like the swine flu outbreak, right? Remember that? And did I tell y'all that like old people didn't die? That many old people didn't die because there was a similar swine flu back in the late 60s or early 70s. So normally flus kill more old people than young people. A lot of times it kills really young kids too. But not as many died as expected because of that previous exposure. So maybe that's the case with SARS, where there's outbreaks of it continued throughout your lifetime. You tell your kids and your grandkids, I remember when COVID was not a thing, and then it broke out, and we had to be out of school for a year. And so, and maybe, you have some previous immunity. Although, I mean, Miss Aldridge was telling me this morning that she knew somebody that got sick last year, and they'd recently got COVID again, and they were more sick the second time, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I don't know. There's so much about this virus we don't know how it works. But I guess we'll find out a lot coming soon. All right, Zika. A virus transmitted by bites of infected mosquitoes, can be transmitted through sexual contact as well. What do you know about Zika? What's its main effect on people?
I noticed it with the pregnant ladies.
Pregnant women does what?
Does some of the offspring, like, does some of the development,
It'll kill them on impact.
isn't that birth defects or something?
Brain and birth defects.
Causes microcephaly. Microcephaly is small brain. Yeah, that's basically what it means. Like, so if your normal sized brain, like microcephaly would have like a third that size. So their brain doesn't develop properly when pregnant women get Zika. That was a big concern back in the Olympics back in 2016 because there were a lot of cases in Brazil. That and the entire bay they were doing all their aquatic sports in was filled full of hepatitis. But did y'all hear about that? A ton of people got sick, like swimming and sailing in that like bay where they do the outdoor water sports, because a lot of the slums, their wastewater goes into there. And so there'd be like needles and stuff floating around. I mean, it was horrible. A lot of people didn't want to swim or do the aquatic sports there. Like imagine completing like the triathlon or something in that. And there's a ton of we talked about hepatitis B the other day with the food, in the video. Ton of that. When I went to Ecuador, I had to get like hepatitis A, B, and C shots because it's pretty prevalent. Anyway, and then like if you were a woman competing in sports or if you're just traveling, I mean, you would be concerned if there's a possibility of you being pregnant. getting Zika. There have been some cases in the U.S. I don't know if those are primarily coming from other areas and there are people flying in. I don't know how many people have to fly in from another area and then get bit by mosquitoes, like how easily it's transmitted, or if it's just a particular type of mosquito that can transmit it. That's something we'll have to look into more.
All mosquitoes should die. Why? Why did God?
I'm not going to argue with that because I don't like them either. My son got a really bad case of MRSA with a mosquito bite when he was 2. Like, MRSA is an antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And so there was a mosquito bite on his arm. It got in through there. His arm swelled up. He got like 105 temperature. He had to go and have surgery in the hospital and stay in for 2 or 3 days and get like heavy doses of antibiotics because normal antibiotics don't work on it. So, yes. Not a mosquito fan. All right, cholera, the last one. This is one of our videos on today, similar to dysentery. Now, dysentery, a lot of those are caused by amoebic dysentery, which is a type of amoeba, which is another type of protus that gets in your digestional tract. Cholera is a bacterial disease that is contracted and from infected water. And so the video is going to do a very good job of showing how, well, let's just look here. Turn to page 385. I think we really take for granted how good our sanitation is and how clean our water is here. There are many people living all over the world, and if you guys travel outside of like developed countries, you're going to find yourself being a little more cautious than you normally would. Now, the book, granted, is about 10 years old, but it says roughly 1/6 or nearly 1/6 of the world's population do not have access to sufficient safe drinking water. This says 3 million people die from diarrheal deaths each year. I've heard 4. It depends on where you look or what stats you're looking at. That's a lot of people dying from diarrhea. And then if you look at the bottom of that paragraph, Jeremiah, in Sub-Saharan Africa, where we talked about with the mosquitoes, 36% of people in those areas do not have access to improved sanitation, meaning they do not have access to like a normal toilet. So this is why you find a lot of these diseases that are prevalent. Oftentimes, they also don't have access to clean drinking water. I know my uncle, he went on a couple mission trips there where I think it was to Kenya where they would go in and install wells in those areas just because if you don't have the equipment, it's not really easy to dig a well, like a sanitary well. Now like most wells are like maybe this big. They drill down and then they put like a plastic or metal, usually plastic, not metal pipe anymore, and they case it off where like dirt won't fall in, and then you just drop a little like a long skinny round bucket down in there and it fills up and you can pull it back up. That way like you don't have animals and stuff falling in a big well that people have dug out by hand. And so there's just not a lot of clean drinking water sources, and also there's not a lot of good places to get rid of your poo. And I think there's not a lot of education in terms of like what causes a lot of the diseases they have. You're going to see that in the video. The video I've got is basically a educational video on like how to prevent cholera. Now, Asher brought up a good point last period because he said, are people in these neighborhoods who are going to have Wi-Fi? How are they going to figure this out? But maybe somebody in the neighborhood or somebody that knows them will bring them this knowledge. Now, you can see on 385 here, we've got a young lady at the top. I think this is kind of your typical slum. This is in Cambodia, where you can see these kind of like little shantytown tarps and tin huts, and they have a little ditch behind or going through them, and that's where people poop and pee and where the water runs through. And usually they don't have hardly any sanitation, like any place to actually go where your sewage is put underground away from water supplies. And so that causes a lot of bacterial and viral infections. Okay? So, anyway, be thankful for your clean water.